Okay, so good morning. This is class 22 in Touching a City's Soul. We're on page 112 if you have the book. Remember, this is a collection of maamarim, of Hasidic discourses, and of sichos, and people's reminiscing about the previous Rebbe's visit to Chicago in 1942. And the section that we just started is a maimer, a Hasidic discourse, which was said on the 10th of Shvat, which actually he said has been his grandmother's yahrzeit, and in her honor, and it actually wound up being his own yahrzeit years later. So it has a special significance in the Hasidic calendar. And what we started, as we said before, every Hasidic discourse starts with something, a verse in the Torah or a quote from Gemara, something that it's going to be expounded upon. And the quote that this mimer starts with is called, the quote is, that a person should not pray without having what's called kaved reish, which literally translates as a heavy head, as opposed to being lightheaded. So he's explaining, the previous Rebbe is explaining in this mimer, what does that mean? What is the preparation of having a kaved reish? What does that, how is that played out in practicality? So we talked about two things. In the last class, we talked about two ideas. We talked about the idea of hachna and shiflus, that like a definition of kaved reish, of being, so to speak, heavy-headed, is the idea of hachna and shiflus, which they both mean some sort of humility. But as the previous Rebbe explained, the hachna comes from physical challenges that a person could be having with either livelihood or health or children, some sort of challenge that they're having, and that makes them broken. Even as somebody who's very resilient could feel the difficulty of it, and shiflus is coming from a more spiritual source or spiritual challenges where the person feels spiritually challenged and bitter about their spiritual state. And he draws a distinction between bitter versus depressed, and how depression is a negative trait which just draws a person down and sort of makes them heavy and like not doing anything, whereas bitterness spurs a person to action and they want to correct the issue. So that's where we're holding in the mimer. These are these two ideas, and now he's going to explain, a little bit about how these both have to come from one's ultimate source, and how one uses or activates those qualities as a preparation for prayer, and sort of like, when does one activate these qualities as a preparation for prayer? And yeah, so it gets a little mystical and a little practical at the same time in this section. So on page 112, like I said, section 3 of the mimer. Okay, good to go. So this explains the concept of kaved reish discussed at the beginning of this discourse, meaning these ideas that we just talked about of hachna and shiflus, and the idea of feeling sort of crushed from physical challenges or humbled from spiritual challenges. These things create this feeling of what's called kaved reish, that at the beginning of the mimer, the quote that says that a person should not daven except with this quality sort of activated. So this is how this quality is activated, through these things, and it sort of explains. So although hachna and shiflus, remember those are the two ideas of humility, the two different types of humility, are two different thrusts in Avodah. They're two different aspects of service of Hashem. Nevertheless, it must be that both hachna and shiflus have a single cause, like a single root, basically, that leads to hachna and shiflus, because their source would be one. However, although they have a single cause, each of them, hachna and shiflus, must have a distinct source within that general cause, right? So like a general cause for this type of humility, but then there's a specific antecedent that creates each type of specific humility, whether it's from physical or from spiritual reasons. Hachna has its distinct source within the cause, and shiflus has its own distinct source within the cause. So there's like the overarching way that they are both coming from someplace, and then there's like the specifics of how it breaks down. The distinct sources of hachna and shiflus are different details in the essence of their common cause, right? There's an essential common cause, and then there's details within that cause, and one leads to hachna and one leads to shiflus. Almost you can imagine like maybe a tree trunk with different branches. Koved Rosh, which is what we're trying to accomplish so that we can daven, right? This concept of heavy-headedness. Again, in English, it sounds very ridiculous. So I don't really even want to translate it anymore, because we're trying to define an idea that's a very refined spiritual idea, and heavy-headed sounds very strange in English. But we're trying to activate this quality of Koved Rosh, and we're saying that Koved Rosh is brought about by those services that constitute prefatory steps to and preparation for the Avodah of prayer. Meaning, what we're trying to accomplish is this Koved Rosh so that we can start davening. And by doing that, we have to do some preparation before davening, and that preparation before davening will result in Koved Rosh, and then that Koved Rosh can result in proper davening. We're like backing it up, you know? It's sort of like you want to make a dinner party, so you're having lots of people for dinner, you're going to give them delicious food. So first you have to make a menu, and then you have to make your shopping list, and then you have to go shopping, right? So like there's all these steps until you get to the actual food on the table. It does not magically appear. I know that seems kind of unfair sometimes, but that's not what happens. So the same thing, if a person wants to have a proper davening, it just doesn't magically appear, right? It requires preparation. You need to have Koved Rosh. Great. Well, how do I get Koved Rosh? Oh, well, let's back that up a little bit. We need to have these concepts of hachna and shiflus, and so how do we get that? We have to back that up too, right? We keep backing up until we get to the first antecedent that we can start to exercise, and then it starts the chain, you know, like the idea of shopping, menu, whatever, you know, you begin with the end in mind, and then you back it up to what the steps are that you need to get there. So Koved Rosh is brought about by those services that constitute, I don't know how to pronounce this, prefatory steps to and preparation for the Avodah of prayer. Is that right, Joni? Did I say that right?
Yep, perfect.
Thank you. The Avodah of prayer. So this is what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to the Avodah of prayer, right? We're trying to get to that set table with delicious food on it. So the Avodah of prayer is service of the heart. That's what we're trying to get to. As the verse states, to serve him with all your heart. In other words, when we're talking about serving Hashem, it says in Shema that we should serve him with all our heart. So the question is, and it says in other psukim, we should serve Hashem with our heart. And the question is, what does service of the heart mean? We know what service of tzedakah means. We know what service of eating kosher means. It's very clear. What does service of the heart mean? Like, how do we define service of the heart? So Rashi says, Zut tefillah, this is davening. Service of the heart is davening. How do we serve Hashem with our hearts? By praying. We're supposed to bring our hearts into our prayers, right? It's like a heart, like we even say in English, a heart-to-heart conversation. Davening is like having a heart-to-heart conversation with Hashem. So we're bringing our heart into our davening. So, like it says, the avodah of prayer is a service of the heart, as the verse states, and to serve him with all your heart. Our sages comment on this verse. What is the service of the heart? This is prayer. And like I said, Rashi quotes this Gemara, and he explains, according to the simple explanation of the verse, the avodah shebelev, service of the heart, is prayer. The avodah of prayer is service with the heart. There is a purpose for the avodah of prayer. Aside, so what does service of the heart mean? Okay, prayer, service of the heart. That's very nice. What is service of the heart? Like, what does that mean? So the avodah of prayer, service of the heart. There is a purpose for the avodah of prayer, aside from the entreaties that God provide abundant blessing for children, health, and livelihood, so that one can serve God with tranquility. That, in other words, that is a reason to daven. That is one reason to daven. In fact, the Rambam states very clearly that the halacha of davening, the mitzvah of davening, is that a person needs to ask God for their needs, because as he explains, who else are you going to ask for your needs, right? Who else can provide our needs? Only Hashem can provide our needs. So when we have a need, we ask Hashem for it. We also have to make a vessel. We also, right? Yes, we have to do things in the physical world, but the halacha of davening is to ask God for our needs, to acknowledge that we need him to fulfill our needs, and so on. However, what the previous Rebbe is saying here is that there is an additional purpose, which is why it's called service of the heart, meaning the idea of service of service of the heart is also more than just asking for our needs. So yes, and we ask for our needs, and interesting, you notice that the previous Rebbe says, so that one can serve him with tranquility, right? That's the reason, or the explanation, like we need these things because we want to be able to serve Hashem. We're not trying to be selfish about children, health, livelihood. So the purpose of the avodah of prayer, aside from the entreaties that God provided blessing for children, health, and livelihood, so that one can serve him with tranquility, is, next page, the purpose of the avodah of prayer is for a person to bring about an improvement in his spiritual state. Meaning, there's the practical side of davening, and then there's like the spiritual avodah side of davening. Just like with every other mitzvah, but with davening, it's even more. Meaning, we know the Chassidus teaches us that every mitzvah has its practical side, its practical halacha, how to do it, right? Kosher meat has to chew its cud, has split hooves. Kosher fish, fins and scales. So there's a practical halacha. Then there's the avodah aspect of that mitzvah, right? What's the avodah aspect? We learn that we're supposed to, just like an animal chews its cud, we're supposed to think things over and not act out of haste. Just like a fish has fins that direct it, we have Torah that directs it. Just like fish has scales that protect it, we have mitzvahs that protect us. Just like an animal has split hooves, it has a hoof that touches the ground, separates it from the ground. We're supposed to be separated from materialism, but they're supposed to be split because we have to have godliness, let godliness in to the material. So there's the practical side of kashrus, like the physically practical side of how we do the mitzvah practically. And then there's the spiritual service of that mitzvah, that we're trying to get to the godly light in the mitzvah and also incorporate that into our service of Hashem. The same thing in a certain way, the previous Rebbe is saying that there's the practical side of the mitzvah, entreaties that God provide all of these things for us. And then there's also the avodah, the purpose of the avodah of prayer, to bring about an improvement in his spiritual state, right? That's another aspect of it. It's another aspect. He should advance in matters of intellect, i.e., he should strengthen his understanding so that he can grasp a divine concept in a way that he can understand has an effect on his midos. His midos are his, character traits in the actual performance of mitzvahs, and that his conduct express very good character traits. That's all we're supposed to accomplish when we daven. That's it. Just one sentence here, that's it. right? I'm going to reread it because there's a sentence that's packed with lots of.
Could you reread that again?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm going to reread that. So, what's the purpose of Avodah prayer? We're trying to improve our spiritual state with our davening. We're not saying how successful we always are with our davening, but at least if we know that there's some sort of goal, every so often we might have a little bit of breakthrough light in this area or in one of these areas. So what he wants to do, how he wants his spiritual state to improve is that he should advance in matters of intellect, meaning he should strengthen his understanding, right? That was the first maamar, talked a lot about understanding godliness. But so that he can grasp a divine concept in a way that his understanding has an effect on his midos, right? The previous Rebbe talked a lot about this idea that we don't just study Torah as an intellectual pursuit. A person could understand something really, really, really deeply and not connect to the godliness in it, not sense the godliness in it, right? It's important to sense the godliness in it. So he wants to advance in matters of intellect and strengthen his understanding so that he can grasp a divine concept in a way that his understanding has an effect on his midas, that his intellect, his chachma bina das, should affect his chesed v'or tiferes, it should affect his midas, the way he feels about things, more refined love and awe of Hashem, right? More refined love of another Jew. His intellect should be able to grasp his learning in a way that it affects his midas, and that will affect in the actual performance of mitzvahs, right? Because so his mind should affect his emotions, which should affect his actions, head, heart, hands, right? That's what we're trying to accomplish here. This is not a removed study that we're, trying to like understand some kind of abstract ideas and philosophy, and we've enlarged our repertoire of, philosophical ideas and that type of thing. It is true that there's a lot of very deep ideas here, but these deep ideas are supposed to be head, heart, hands, right? They're supposed to affect, you learn about Atzilus, so how do you do Atzilus? Okay, physically you're not doing the world of Atzilus necessarily, but the idea is that, okay, now I'm bringing more real connection to Hashem into my day-to-day life. That's how I bring that learning into practicality, right? So we want our understanding, our intellect to be stronger so that it will affect our midos, so that it will affect our actual performance of mitzvahs. And we're not done yet. It should also, that its conduct should express very good character traits. So we want the learning to affect our actions, and we want the learning to affect our character traits. So for some people, actions are easier, and for some people, being nice is easier, or having refined character traits are easier. But we're saying that we demand both, right? Hashem wants both. He wants our actions and our character traits to be refined. So the avodah aspect of tefillah is focus, or we're asking for, and we're trying to do through davening these, like, I guess 4 steps almost, right? Like our intellect should understand Hashem better, but it should be in a way, that affects our midas, that brings to action and to refined character traits. So that's
what's the difference between midos and character traits? I thought midos are character traits.
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's the word midas usually translated as character traits. I would imagine that in this particular context, again, everything is by context, right? Like you have to see how it's being used, but imagine that in this context, we're talking about the way that the intellect affects the midos. Like it talks about this idea that when you understand something, you feel differently about it. It arouses love and awe of Hashem. You feel differently about it. And then the second midas in the good character traits, imagine is talking about your interpersonal relationships. How you sort of behave in this world with others. That's what I would imagine the difference is in this context. So if that's what we're trying, any other questions? Okay. It's kind of leaving us all stunned, I think. Like, how do we do this exactly? But so as we've come to realize, the previous Rebbe doesn't pull any punches when he says something. He just like says it, and that's just what he says. So he says, like, guys, like, let's get our act together here. Like, this is what the avodah davening is all about. So we can understand if this is the avodah davening, right? We're not like, going back to that example of, having people over for dinner, we're not serving them peanut butter and jelly. You know what I mean? It's like there's some sort of gourmet meal being served here. So yes, you can feed people peanut butter and jelly, and that requires less preparation than feeding them a 5-course meal with delicious choices of foods and so on, right? So here he's describing that if that's our real goal of davening, we can understand that it would require some preparation. You don't just jump right into that, even though maybe we'd like to be able to do that. And sometimes we probably do actually just jump right in, and then we wonder why it's not working. But it does something. Again, remember, the first part of davening is to ask God for our needs. That's the baseline halacha of davening every day. Ask God for our needs. That's done when we ask God for our needs. It's not wasted effort. And then this second aspect of the avodah is something that's a work in progress, right? Probably some days we feel more connected, some days we feel less, some days we are able to concentrate more, some days our mind is wandering more, right? There's different. We're a work in progress. So, but again, the previous Rebbe is telling us this is like where we want to aim. Like this is the goal of what davening could accomplish for us. So, and accomplish in the world, right? Like this is what we're trying to accomplish. So, this is going to require some preparation on our part, which is this idea of like, in order to have this type of experience, you need to have Chabad Reish while you're davening. So that, again, then we would back up to like, well, then how do we get Chabad Reish? Right? So we just keep breaking it down so that so like what happens next? Or not really what happens next, what has to have happened already by the time we want to be here? What has to have happened? And by the time we want to be there, what has to have happened before that? We just keep backing up until we get to the beginning that, we can start someplace, basically. Okay, any questions? Okay, let's continue. So I know this next sentence will be a shocker. Such an avodah requires preparatory steps and preparations. Like, that makes sense, right? Like, we can't just fulfill the purpose of the avodah of prayer without preparatory steps and preparations. So now we're wondering, what are those? Right? Like, help us out over here now. What are we supposed to do as preparation? So these preparatory steps and preparations begin with dun, 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 the nighttime Shema. Kriya Shema Shal Hamita. The Shema that we say before we go to sleep. But nobody expected that. That is the preparatory step. Before we go to sleep at night, saying Shema properly. Kriya Shema Shal Hamita, that is recited before going to sleep at night. That is the preparatory step for having a good davening in the morning. Interesting, you'll hear why as he continues. But that's going to sleep properly. Probably our mothers told us this, right? Getting a good night's sleep, it means you're gonna have a better day the next day. It turns out that it's not only true physically, it's also true spiritually, that the spiritual preparation for sleep also leads to spiritually better day the next day. Kriya Shema Shal Hamita of the previous night is the initial preparation for the avodah prayer of the following day. practical. That's just a very practical thing. The avodah of Kriya Shema Shal Hamita, right? That means reciting Shema before going to sleep, is the spiritual accounting, Cheshbon HaNefesh, that a person must make regarding the purpose for which God sent him to this world and how he is carrying out this mission. So here we're backing it up further, right? We're saying we want to daven with Kavod Rosh because we want to be able to not only ask God for our needs, but also to feel this hachnan shiftless, this humility, which is the Kavod Rosh that we're trying to get to, because we just don't want to just ask God for our needs. We also want to have better understanding that's going to affect our midos and our actions and our refined character traits. How do we do that? By having a proper Kriya Shema Shal Hamita the night before. Okay, how do we have a proper Kriya Shema Shal Hamita the night before? Right? How do we do that? So how we do that is that a person must make a spiritual accounting regarding the purpose for which God sent him into the world and how he's carrying out this mission before he goes to sleep at night. So we had the El Fabrang in, and we talked about making a Cheshbon HaNefesh, right? Like making an accounting of the soul during this month of El before Rosh Hashanah. In addition to like that big Cheshbon HaNefesh that's supposed to happen in Elul, there are miniature Cheshbon HaNefeshes that happen, miniature accountings, spiritual accountings that happen. There's a miniature one that happens before each new year. So there's one before the new year, that's the big one. Before each new month, that's smaller. Before each Shabbos, Thursday night, that's smaller. And then every night before we go to sleep, we like look back at the day basically, and we go through our day in our head and we make an accounting. What is that? The previous is going to explain what that means now. During Kriya Shema Shal Hamita, during this saying Shema before we go to sleep at night, a person must also make a personal reckoning about how he spent the day. Very simple, actually. I mean, straightforward anyway. Compare how he spent the day compared with what one's conduct ought to be according to Torah. In other words, what did I do and what was expected of me to do. So before we go to sleep at night, we think for a minute or two, or however long we need, I guess, about how we spent our day and if there's anything that we think could have been improved and needs to be improved for the future and how we spent our day that day. We're self-reflective. In today's language, we're self-reflective so that we can be mindful the next day, right? That's like today's way of expressing this, but this is an age-old Torah concept. That we think back at our day so that we can be better prepared for the next day, to make better choices perhaps, or to have a different focus perhaps, or to say, yes, we did what we could and we're gonna, continue to grow and do better. It doesn't, a person's first thought and first words when he awakes from sleep, right? Because he says Shema, he goes to sleep, ought to be about serving God. In other words, the idea is that right before we go to sleep, we sort of say goodnight to Hashem and we have an accounting of our day. And then as soon as we wake up, we say good morning to Hashem, right? We say Maida'ani. As soon as we wake up, the first words that we say are Maida'ani. That Maida'ani means I'm thankfully acknowledging that Hashem has given me back my soul, right? So he's giving me back my soul. So that sets my mind into a framework of like, oh, so then like I'm supposed to be serving him today because he gave me back my soul. I don't remember who I was just speaking to, somebody who was telling me that they have a woman in their, I think this is what it was, a woman in their Chabad house who's 100 years old. And every morning that she wakes up, she says, yep, I'm still here. So like that, that concept of like, oh, so she wakes up and she says, oh, okay, God gave me back my soul, I'm still here. So when we wake up, the first thing we say is Maida'ani. So the last thing we say before we go to sleep is Shema. And we make an accounting of our day. And that helps us when we wake up. First thing, so we say goodnight to the Eibishter, and then we wake up in the morning, we say good morning to the Eibishter, right? Good morning, Hashem. Thank you for giving me back my soul. That means I should be like using my soul and my body to help further your purpose in creation today. And before I go to sleep, I'm like, well, how did I do today in that idea that I had when I first woke up of like furthering God's purpose in creation today? How did I do? Okay, here I did well, here I could do better. Okay, good night, Hashem. We'll pull it for tomorrow. Next morning, wake up, good morning, so on, right? So a person's first thought and first words when he awakes from sleep ought to be about serving God. That is why we say, Maida ani lefanecha, I give thanks before you, immediately upon arising. This prayer is a general expression of gratitude in which the person thanks God for his great kindness in returning his soul. Right? Makes sense. This statement of gratitude must be recited immediately when one wakes up from his sleep, even before washing hands, negelvasser. So this is a it's a concept that's emphasized a lot, especially in Chassidus, that when a person wakes up, the very first thing he does is say Maida ani. I remember one of my kids came home from school once, and they were learning Maida ani in school, and so they have all their parsha questions, and their questions supposed to ask them at the Shabbos tables, like, what's the first thing you say when you wake up from school? So another kid was little and said, "Mommy." Mommy. So we had to explain about Maida ani, but the idea is that's really what we're saying when we wake up and say Maida ani. We're actually saying hello to our spiritual creator, right, instead of our physical creator. The same idea. So that's the first thing that we do. We do as soon as we wake up, and it doesn't. That phrase Maida ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayim does not have God's name in it. So we say it while we're still in bed. We don't have to wash our hands, rinse out our mouth, wash our face. We don't have to get dressed, right? We're supposed, before we daven, we're supposed to have done all of those things, right? Sort of made ourselves presentable. But we don't have to do that before we say Maida ani. Maida ani doesn't have God's name in it. And we want our very first awareness of the world to be thanking Hashem for giving our soul back, so that it's focuses our day. The next thing we do is wash negelvasser. We wash our hands this alternating way 6 times, because there's a residue of impurity that remains on the body when we wake up from sleeping. Sleeping is 1/60th of death, and we don't want to go about our day with that impurity on our hands. So Chabad is very strict about that, meaning we actually fill up a cup and a basin. We fill up a washing cup with water and put it in a basin next to the bed so that we can wash our hands before we even get out of bed. But we say Maida ani even before washing hands. It's something to be remarked upon. Meaning, usually we would say we don't do anything before washing our hands, because we don't want to touch anything or touch ourselves or food or another person with those hands that are not spiritually pure. However, we do say this prayer to Hashem because it doesn't have Hashem's name, and also Hasidus explains on a mystical level, this represents this idea that even when a Jew has impure hands, they can still reach out to God. They can still call out to God. God's still our Eibishter, we can still reach out to him. So we specifically say Maida ani with impure hands, then we wash our hands. So that's why the previous Rebbe is mentioning here that we say Maida ani, he's emphasizing we say it even before we wash the hands. In other words, that's a novelty. We don't do anything before we wash our hands, but we do say Maida ani. So again, the idea of saying Shema the night before with an accounting of the soul and waking up, and the first thing we say is Maida ani, these two things serve as that preparation step for having a good davening the next day, the next morning, that will help us deepen our understanding in a way that awakens our midos, in a way that influences our action, in a way that influences our character traits, right? That's we're trying to get to that avodah of davening. To accomplish that, saying Shema properly the night before with an accounting of the soul, and saying Maida ani when we wake up in the morning, even before we wash Nagelwasser, these serve as 2 steps. And then after this prayer, one must occupy himself with serving the Creator, each person according to his level. Torah scholars by studying Torah, and the simple folk who cannot study must recite Tehillim and pray slowly. This, of course, is connected to ordering in the Shabbos class, together with the minyan, right? So it's not. So this is a next step, right? We say Shema properly. We say Maida'ani, and then we say Maida'ani, and we think to ourselves, I should be serving Hashem today. Give me back my soul, and then we actually do that. We actually do things that are going to be serving Hashem. And there's still more. Wait, there's more. Before beginning to pray, one must accept upon himself the mitzvah of love your fellow Jew as yourself, Avas Yisrael. So in the Chabad Siddur, I'm not sure if it's in other Siddur, but in the Chabad Siddur, according to Nusach Hari, there's actually a phrase that we say, Hareini makabel alai mitzvah aseh shel v'ahavta l'recha kamecha. I take upon myself the mitzvah of loving a fellow Jew. That is before we start the formal prayer. It's part of the morning blessings, and that there's also a lot of discussion in Chassidus about that, right? Like davening is in the place of karbanos, it's in the place of the offerings that were brought in the Beis Hamikdash, and just like the karban, the offering was a communal offering, was on behalf of the whole nation. We're supposed to see our davening is also a communal offering, that we're davening on behalf of the whole nation, and we include other people by saying we accept upon ourselves the mitzvah of loving another Jew. We include them in our davening. We think of others. We daven for others, and in addition, right, there is that part of davening which is like, oh, I'm asking God for my needs, right? We said that's the Rambam says that's the basic thing. The higher level of Avodah is a higher level of Avodah. But the basic thing is we're asking God for our needs. Like, who else are we supposed to ask? Like we said, he's the only one who can give us our needs. So we're asking God for our needs. What are we giving God, like, in return, right? Like, what are we giving to him that is making him happy with us when we're asking for our needs, right? Like, we want to give him something too. So just like it explains, just like a parent, there's no greater nachas for a parent than seeing that their children are getting along with each other, right? That's the biggest nachas for a parent, is when their children get along. So too, the biggest nachas for Hashem is when Jews get along with Jews, when we have Avas Yisrael. So before we sort of dare to say our needs, right? We don't want to like just be so self-centered and just talk about us the whole time, right? Like that joke, enough about me. What do you think about me? You know, enough about me, now about you. What do you think about me? So like that, why are we like saying to Hashem, give me this and give me that? So we're starting by saying, you know, I accept upon myself this mitzvah of loving another Jew. So it's like this idea of like bringing Hashem nachas before we bring him our needs, you know, like we are going to take care of each other, we're helping out each other, and also we have these needs, if you can please help us with them. So another way of preparing for that avodah level of davening to happen is that we are doing an accounting of our actions and so on during the day. When we say Shema at night, we're saying Maida'ani when we wake up in the morning, remembering that, you know, Hashem gave us our neshama and we're going to be serving him that day. We get up and we actually do start serving Hashem, and before we daven, we accept upon ourselves the mitzvah of loving another Jew. So I'm just going to go to the beginning of that sentence again. It says, before beginning to pray, one must accept upon himself the mitzvah of love your fellow Jew as yourself, Avas Yisrael. And in the requests and supplications of prayer, a person should beseech God that he give us the merit of fulfilling the mitzvah of Avas Yisrael in actual practice and with meticulous care. So because before we start davening, we say we accept upon ourselves the mitzvah of Avas Yisrael, that's very nice. But that's a verbal acceptance. We want to make sure that we are able to actually help another Jew during the course of our day. So it actually talks about in Chassidus how a person should look for ways to help another Jew. well, my husband and I were just talking about how, like, someone he knows, he like respects a lot, that he's the type of person who you get the feeling like he's looking for ways to help, and offering help. He's not, right? He's not just said, like, the difference between a person when they find out, you know, just on a practical level, the difference between a person, let's say, you know, you're buying milk, and somebody says, oh, you're buying milk, oh, I also need milk. So they could say, I'll get you your milk when I get my milk, or they could say, could you get me milk when you get your milk, right? So that idea of like being on the lookout for ways to help another person, that's a value. It's a Jewish value to try to be of service to God and to another Jew. So we say, oh, I accepted myself this mitzvah, and then we ask in our davening that we should be meritorious enough, that we should be a shliach, we should be a messenger to be able to help somebody else. Not that they should need help, meaning that we should be able to have Avas Yisrael. That's all. That we should be able to fulfill what we took upon ourselves. Which is why, like, I always learned and suggest to women that after you say that line, you should give tzedakah, because at least it's a practical application of that idea. You know, you took it upon yourself to give tzedakah. That is an act of Avos Yisrael. It's not the same as, you know, helping somebody physically who you meet during your day, but eventually that money is going to be going to somebody who needs the money. So that's an act of Avos Yisrael that you can do right there and then after you take on that, or, you know, orally. I remember when I was in seminary, a friend of mine and I made this, like, I don't know if it's like a thing together. I guess a resolution together that we were going to try every day to find a way to help somebody without their knowledge, that like they shouldn't know that we had helped them. So when you're living in a group situation, it's very easy to find those kind of situations, right? You find somebody's coat on the floor, you pick it up and you put it back on the hook, or you put it on the back of the chair or something like that, and they don't know that it fell, and they don't know that it was picked up. I mean, you know, that kind of thing. It's not as easy to do when you're like living in, you know, different houses and so on. But still, even if you're living with family members are also Jews. It could also be nice to them. Doesn't just have to be strangers. Sometimes it's harder. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do. After the morning prayers, when a person goes about his business affairs must be conducted with fidelity, honestly, and forthrightly. Right? That's how we apply this, right? In addition, each person needs to have fixed times for Torah study every day. He should recite the afternoon and evening prayers with a minyan and conduct himself with good character traits. This is the pattern of conduct that a person must follow the entire day as required by Torah. Meaning that's what he's trying to do. In other words, he's giving him, the previous Rebbe is giving sort of a program for the day. You know, these are these days to-do list, I guess you could say, right? We all make checklists for ourselves, and, you know, we got to get this done, this done, this done. So he's saying this is a spiritual to-do list, right? Occupy ourselves with serving our Creator, learning Torah according to our level, davening according to our level, taking upon ourselves the love of a fellow Jew, actually trying to do that in actual practice, conduct our business affairs with fidelity, make sure we're studying and davening throughout the day the way that we're supposed to be studying and davening throughout the day, and developing our good character traits. Kind of a simple program, right?
Is that all? I mean, my gosh, what's this problem?
Yeah, exactly. As they say, it's simple, but it's not easy. It's simple and straightforward, but it's not easy. It's clear, it's just not so easy, right? So that piece. So let's read the summary, and then maybe there'll be people want to discuss or have questions a little bit about what we just did. So let's read the summary. The summary is Hachna and Shifla. Again, this is a summary that the previous Rebbe wrote, right? He wrote, for some of his maamarim, he actually wrote his own summaries. So hachna and shiflus, remember that those are the two words that were used for humility. One coming from difficulties in the physical realm of living, hachna, and shiflus, challenges coming in the spiritual realm. So hachna from the physical, sort of a person feels broken because of their physical difficulties that they're going through, and a person can feel bitter, which again is in Torah, the term in Hebrew is actually a positive term. It means there's some life. He feels like he has to do something. He feels a bitterness about his spiritual state, means he's spurred to action. Are two aspects of Kavod Reish. We want to have these aspects because remember, we're trying to discuss this quote, Ein Ein Lispal El Mitech Kavod Reish. We're not, don't daven unless, daven with this quality. So this humility, this feeling of humility are two aspects of Kavod Reish. That's the quality we're trying to accomplish in order to be able to daven, which is a preparation for prayer. The purpose of the descent of the soul into the body is to serve the Creator through studying Torah, observing mitzvahs, praying with a minyan, and expressing good character traits. Women obviously don't have to pray with a minyan, right? But praying and expressing good character traits. The supplications in prayer ought to be both for abundant blessing in the material sense, and that one be worthy of becoming a servant of God and feel love for one's fellow Jews. The preparation for prayer begins with Kriya Shema Shalamita, that's the Shema the night before, in which one makes a personal accounting regarding the divine intention in his creation. So like we say in many other classes, make this a sign and hang it on your refrigerator, right? Like this is sort of encapsulates everything in one brief sentence, paragraph, like what is our whole life about, and how to go about it sort of in a practical, step by step. Okay, questions or comments, or I'm sure people want to say something. And I don't think we're not going to start the next section today. I think it's too much to start in the last few minutes of class, and I think it's also good to process now for a few minutes before anyway. So, because this was a lot.
It was a lot, Chaya. Before I go to bed, I usually think of a couple of things that through the day that I went through the day that I can thank Hashem for.
Beautiful.
Really simple things, like if it rains, if we need rain, to thank him for the rain, or to thank him for whatever. And I find that is a cheshbon, because through the day I'm not so aware of it, but when I think back on it, then I could see. I'm trying to see God's hand in the day. So that's what I'm doing, and it's very helpful. I could actually feel myself kind of relaxing before going to bed. My question is that the Kriya Shema at night comes before all these other prayers that we say before we go to bed at night. It's not the last thing we say. Do we have to do the cheshbon during the Kriya Shema, or can we do it before we say the last paragraph of going to?
My understanding is when we say the terms Kriya Shema Shalamita, it refers to that entire section of prayers. You're not talking about just the actual paragraph of Shema. It's a set. Kriya Shema Shalamita is a set. That's why it's not just saying Shema. It's saying the Shema before going to sleep at night. It includes that entire few pages of prayers. But again, just like anything else, when a person is starting something, let's say person's not saying Shema before going to sleep at night yet, right? So they just like person's not davening in the morning yet. There's, we take it on slowly in small bites. So if a person is not saying Shema yet and they want to start saying Shema at night because of what we just learned, start by saying Shema in the first paragraph of Shema, right? That's a way to start. And I think your idea of, thanking Hashem for, trying to find three things to thank. You said three things to try to find.
Right.
Three things before you go to sleep. Yeah. Beautiful. But
it could be little things, because
sure.
Because Hashem is in the detail. I always feel it's
right?
in the details. Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful idea. It makes us more aware of Hashem, and that's also a spiritual service, is to be more aware, right? Just to be more aware.
Exactly.
So yeah. there's that one last paragraph called Hamapil, which after that, we're not supposed to eat or drink or talk anymore. So that might be said a little bit later than everything else if, you know, you need to take care of something quickly or something, you know, but that's a unit. It's like a set of prayers, like the morning brachos are a set of prayers.
Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, sure. Any other questions or comments about what we learned today?
I know this isn't the intention of this, but it feels like a little bit overwhelming. And it's okay, because it's the most important thing in the world. So it should be big. But I feel like I guess some of the words like bitter, I don't know if it's not translating or, and yes, taking an accounting is important, but like Maka said, we're not just thinking what we could have done better and how bad we were during the day, but also being grateful to Hashem for good things. That's part of the accounting. But I guess it just feels, I don't think the intention is for it to be so, I don't know how to explain it.
Strong, like it's very strong.
I mean, strong, good, but like negative in a sense. Like, I'm not saying it exactly right, but I don't know if the words I'm not translating the words well in my head, like bitterness and.
Maybe you mean onerous?
Yeah, that's a good word. Thank you, Joni.
Like hard in a way that feels like a burden.
So that, and the tone is kind of awe has a tone of uplifting in a sense to me. Awe is like a sign of respect, a sign of Hashem's greatness that
Awe is awesome.
puts awe in us. But bitterness and atzvut and things like that, which exist in us, absolutely. But trying to utilize, and I don't know, reckoning, accounting, I think they're all important, but it feels, maybe it's just because I'm not good at it yet. So that I don't like to do things I'm not good at.
Like the rest of us.
I don't know what it is. I can't explain it.
Yeah, so I think it's important, which is why I try every time I use the words or read the words to highlight it, but it still, I think, could be challenging, meaning the first time where the previous Rebbe defines the difference between bitterness and depression, like it's a very specific, it's like a medical term, you know, it's like, it's not a term, it shouldn't be thought of in the way that we use the term in English and just talking and vocabulary and, you know, the way that we use it, right? Bitterness is an alive emotion that causes change. Depression is an emotion that causes just being drawn down. It's a positive thing. Bitterness is a positive thing. And we did just that idea. I mean, it bears repeating because I think it's and again, all these English words, right? I keep saying I don't even want to translate Kovid Rosh because in English it sounds so strange. In Hebrew, it's a concept. In English, it sounds like a weird thing. What does heavy-headed mean? It's not even positive. Again, bitter. Just to reiterate, bitter doesn't mean angry or upset or that's how it's used in English. The way that we're using it here is very specifically something that's upsetting to someone that causes them to move forward to a different place. I don't know if there's one word in English to describe that, but in Hebrew, the word is mariros. So it's like, you know, it's almost like maybe we could translate it as tangy, you know, it's like something that's tangy. It catches you up short and it's maybe a little unpleasant and it means you want to do something about it. You know, I mean, Brene Brown actually talks about the difference between guilt and shame, that guilt is a positive emotion and shame is a negative emotion because guilt causes a person to rectify something that might be wrong, whereas shame is just something that makes them feel bad about themselves. That's just a judgment. Now, other people don't use guilt that way, right? Guilt can also be used in a way that's like extremely negative and draws a person down, but that's how she's defining it, to make a distinction between a negative feeling that is actually useful and causes growth versus a negative feeling that just draws a person down. So we have to, whenever we're like learning something, we have to take the author's use of the terminology on his terms, what he means by it, versus what the associations are with that word for us. Otherwise, we can't understand what they're saying. You know what I mean? So yes, in English, a lot of these terms are very strange sounding, right? And to a psychologist, depression might be clinical sounding, and he's not using it clinically either. He's saying, although somebody who's clinically depressed is closer to the way that the Alter Rebbe is using the term depression than not. In a sense, he said, you know, depression just draws a person down, makes them lethargic, makes them not take action. That's a little bit connected to this idea of clinical depression too. Whereas mariros, which is bitterness, doesn't mean anger, resentment, negativity. That's not what it means, which is how we sometimes use it. It means tangy, you know, like something tastes bitter. That's what, right? What is tasting bitter? It wakes up it actually, there's like, you know, health and holistic health, they talk about how it's important to have something bitter because it activates different parts of the digestive system, activates the liver, the gallbladder, I think also, it activates different taste buds in the mouth. Like it's important to include bitters in your diet, right? It's like actually healthy for you. Spiritual bitterness is actually healthy. It's self-reflection that leads to action. But it leads to action because it's a little uncomfortable, the way that like a bitter tasting thing is a little uncomfortable, but it's palatable and it's good for you, and it's actually you know, it's actually used for health purposes. So maybe we should translate it as tangy. I don't know, we'll be the first class I think to do that, but hey, we could do that. You know, so let's try to make sure that we're not bringing, it's hard because we use these terms, these are common terms, but it's not it's not those associations. These words are not with those associations, not the atzvos, or atzvos may be closer to it, and that's not positive. That's like that's a very challenging thing, and that we're trying to stay away from. Whereas bitterness is something that it's like enlivening. It's like it's like wakes us up, something that wakes us up. Look, coffee is a bitter, and that's what it does. Coffee wakes us up. So imagine, you know, a shot of espresso in the morning, like, oh, now I see, right? Now I understand that that's not a good thing or that is a good thing, but it's not like, oh, beating oneself up kind of a thing. It's more like, oh, like, okay, I've got to move forward. It spurs us forward. So I hope that addresses your question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to have to end here. I'm sorry, but I hope there weren't too many more questions, but we could always come back to them next time if we need to. Anyway, have a good day. Nice to see
Thank you.
faces.
Have a good day.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thank you. Okay,
Thank you.
bye-bye. Okay,
Bye-bye.
okay.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Be well, be well. Bye.
Thank you, Chaya.
Sure. Bye. Bye.